Gamar Chatima Tova and Good Yantif to everyone. It again, Good Yantif. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. As Herb mentioned in his remarks, it is quite freeing to be able to walk around a little bit. One of the things that I enjoy, and this is now pre-pandemic, which thank God through the generosity of everyone, we're able to do again, and that is on Shabbat to leave the bima and to walk amongst those who are here in person while still having the ability to be seen on live stream. It's a wonderful thing, and it truly is freeing. I remember one of my first, or actually it was my very first, Devar Torah in rabbinical school, and in the front of the room there was a table, right in the front of the room. And I watched as various classmates gave their drashot. I was focused more on thinking about what they're saying rather than physically where they were. And I gave my Devar Torah. It was amazing. I gave my Devar Torah, and I stood like this just behind the table. And the feedback that I received was really important feedback and truly helped to shape how I speak today, and that is, don't confine yourself behind the table. You don't have to do that. You don't have to stand perfectly still, but you can come, just as we talk about in Judaism, the idea of meeting each other where we are and going on a sacred journey. We can take that journey and be closer to the community we serve and the community we love. So it is truly freeing to be able to do that. Today, I want to talk about the idea of feeling vulnerable. And on Yom Kippur, we can look at what we're doing here as an example of feeling vulnerable. We're asking ourselves to open our hearts and to forgive. We're opening our hearts in the hopes that others will forgive us. And ultimately, we hope that God forgives us and grants us more opportunity to improve ourselves and our world by writing and sealing us in the book of life. There's a powerful story in the Talmud. It talks about when the great sage Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was near death. And he was near death, and he was quite pious, and he was very worried. His students came to see him in an attempt not only to pay respects to their teacher, but also to provide their great teacher with some semblance of comfort during this most vulnerable time. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw his students, the first thing he did was cry. That's a natural response to feeling vulnerable. And while we don't know exactly what those tears represented to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, I can only imagine it represented a sense of hope in those students who are here to carry on the traditions of our people. It was a sense of sadness that his opportunity to be a leader and a teacher and a mentor were coming to an end. And there had to be some semblance of fear, knowing that divine judgment was upon him. His students didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to do. And in those type of moments, sometimes no matter what we say is right or no matter what we say is wrong, there isn't an answer to how we address each other or ourselves during these most vulnerable moments. So students, out of respect for their teacher and knowing his amazing teachings that have guided and shaped their lives, they asked him for a final blessing. And this was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's final blessing to his students. Yehi ratzon, shetehei morah shamayim aleichem k'moreh basar v'dam. May your fear of God be greater than your fear of people. What a powerful teaching. All the more so, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai able to compose himself at that moment to give that teaching to his students. That in itself reminds us, I believe, why we're here today. Sometimes people ask me, do you fast on Yom Kippur? Some of you know me as an anti-fastite. I don't particularly think that fasting in itself achieves the goal of us feasting on holiness. I'm a realist, and fasting makes us hungry. And fasting itself is something that, whereas it can enhance prayer for some, and if it does for you, that's wonderful. If it makes you hungry, 7:15 is not that far away tonight. So, but that's a realistic thing, is that it's hard to fast and to fear God. But if we don't fast, in a sense, that's okay. It really is, because we know God forgives us, and we know that God wants us to be healthy and to be our best. That's why if we're taking medication or if we're standing too long, eat or sit. If the ark is opened and you don't feel well enough or strong enough to stand, sit. God forgives us. We have faith in that. God wants us to be our best. Sometimes I question whether when we do things for ourselves in order to help ourselves to be our best, and in the process of doing that, perhaps we accidentally, without malice, wrong someone else in the process. Or like we were talking about last night, if we perceive that others are saying at this particular time, can you believe that so-and-so did this? So-and-so didn't fast. So-and-so, went to the back of the sanctuary and had a sandwich. Bruce, no ideas right there. Where'd you go? No ideas. It actually reminds me of my former congregation. We had who was supposed to be the executive vice president sitting on the bima with me. And as you know, I take humor very seriously, and it's core to who I am. And this gentleman was so nervous sitting on the bima, as many of our bima sitters are today. They're so nervous. I compliment them. Your tuchus felt so well in that chair. You did an amazing job sitting on the bima. So I leaned over to this particular board member. He was so nervous. And I said to him, can you grab my tallis bag? I got a sandwich in there. He started laughing so hard, At least it broke the tension. It was good. But we have to say to ourselves, are people really thinking what we think they're thinking? And if they are, okay. And if they're not, okay. We have to be who we are, to be true to ourselves, and to build a path forward. In a sense, it's this idea of cross-situational consistency. It's this idea that who we are in the synagogue is who we are at home, is who we are when we're out with our family and friends, is who we are when we go on vacation, is who we are when we stay home just with our immediate loved ones. It's not the idea of when I'm in shul, I'll act like this. When I'm out of shul, I will act like this. When I'm with my family, I'm going to be good. And when I'm not with my family, well, we're just going to leave that where it is. We have to be consistent, because that's how we be true to ourselves. One of the things that touched me over the course of the last few days has been this idea of Psalm 23. And the really important messages behind the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We had the opportunity to study that this past year in adult education and talk about different ways those ideas are expressed and how we're able to approach those vulnerable moments and really express ourselves. Now, why this touched me over the course of the last few days not only has to do with the reality of the day that we have right now and our uncertainty and vulnerability of not knowing what lies ahead for us, but dedicating ourselves to trying to be better people. The idea of expressing those concerns in our own authentic way stood out to me, and I'm not trying to be funny when I say this, when I learned that the rapper Coolio died. For those of you who might not know, Coolio was a rapper, and part of his rise to fame was the song he wrote, Gangster's Paradise. Okay, it was featured in a film with, thank you, Michelle Pfeiffer. It was featured in a film with Michelle Pfeiffer. Thank you, Alan. We'll take an hour off your fast. But it's a riff on Psalm 23. It's a riff on Psalm 23. These are some of the lyrics. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I take a look at my life and realize there's not much left. It's afraid, feeling vulnerable. Continues and says, death ain't nothing but a heartbeat away. That's true. Death is a heartbeat away. So he continues to say, tell me, why are we so blind to see that the ones we hurt, that would be in life, are you and me? That's really meaningful for us to consider. We might not have thought of Coolio as the source for such a life lesson, but in this particular case, why are the ones we hurt you and me? Essentially, to me, this means that our actions or our inactions, not only based on our decisions, but we're responsible, and we need to take responsibility for those decisions. We need to be responsible for ourselves and realize that the decisions that we make not only impact us, but they impact our community, they impact our family, and some of these decisions, actions or inactions, affect the greater Jewish people as well. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of disappointing each other? Are we afraid for standing up for what we believe in? Are we afraid what other people might think if we take a stand for or against something? God's going to understand. Why are we afraid of people? We know that throughout all of our services, and ingrained in our Torah, is this idea of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that we should love each other as ourselves. And as we stand here today, we support each other when we declare our various transgressions over the course of the past year. In the Ashamnu itself, we say, and we beat our chest, we abuse, we betray, we are cruel, we destroy, we embitter, and we go on and on and on. Now, maybe all of these different transgressions apply to us individually. Maybe they do. My sense is probably some of them do, but not all of them do. So why do we repent for that? Well, the idea is that we don't have to stand alone, and we can gain strength from others in the community. So we stand together when we say, Rashanu, we are wicked. Shichatnu, we can become extremists. Tiavnu, ta'inu, titanu. We yearn to do evil, we are zealous for bad causes. The idea of being a rasha, which we typically define as an evil person, doing evil deeds, doing very terrible things, is defined quite differently on Pesach. When we sit around our Pesach Sedarim, and please focus on the 4 children and not the brisket, when we sit around our table for our Sedarim, and we talk about the 4 children, and we realize that there's a little bit of the wise child, and the wicked child, and the simple child, and the child that doesn't know how to ask a question in all of us, why is the wicked son wicked? The wicked son is wicked because the wicked child is wicked because that child removes himself or herself from the community and says, this doesn't apply to me, this applies to you. Why should I be concerned about this? Why should I remember this? When this, I'm opting out. This doesn't apply to me. It doesn't speak to me. It's not relevant for me today. It's all about you. When we know the answer is it's all about us. Fear of the other is something that plagues the Jewish people. And it plagues our greater world and society as we feel and we see this division and polarization of everyone. We're all good or we're all bad. There's nothing in between. If you participate in this, you're good. If you participate in this, you're bad. When actually, it might be the same goals we're trying to achieve. Among the many things that I worry a tremendous amount about is anti-Semitism. And what anti-Semitism really is, it's fear of the Jewish people. It's fear of people. We see the same tropes and images and themes from the past. Jews control everything in society, from the bubonic plague of the 14th century all the way to COVID today. It's the Jews' fault. We've heard the characterizations. Jews are vermin and lice. They're termites. They eat away at society. So the question becomes, what do we do when we see this literally in our backyards, when our kids go to school and they experience this? What do we do? What do they do? How do we come together so that we don't fear what others think of us and we take a stand to say we're Jews and we're proud? And what do we do to educate so that those who have these erroneous fears of the Jewish people learn it's not true? And we struggle with the idea of truth today. We all know that anti-Semitism has increased throughout the world. However, in our country, according to the Anti-Defamation League, who tracks many of these events, we've seen a dramatic increase from coast to coast over the course of the last year. Anti-Semitic incidences were up 50% in New York, 59% in California from previous years. That's a tremendous increase. We've seen, according to the FBI, who studies this as well, in 2019, which was not terribly long ago, there were 7,314 hate crimes in the United States. 1,650 were religiously motivated, and of those 1,650, 60% were against the Jewish people. 60%. That's 990 anti-Semitic acts of senseless hatred against the Jews in 2019. That's a lot. It really is a lot. And we see this when we're in touch with our Jewish community. We saw this at Tree of Life Synagogue, which was the deadliest attack on a synagogue in U.S. history, with 11 people being murdered for coming together to build a Jewish community, pray, and support each other. 11 people. We know that 6 months later, in Poway, California, there was an attack at the Chabad house. January of this past year, Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, there was a hostage situation. And last Passover, just a few months ago, the alleged shooter who killed 7 people in Highland Park on July 4th entered Central Avenue Synagogue, a Chabad house in Highland Park, And thankfully, he was asked to leave. And thankfully, he did. I can only imagine what his intentions were when he walked in there. All the more so, part of this rise in anti-Semitism has to do with the Jewish people's view of Israel itself. And I worry about that a lot too. If you're born post-1948, we don't know a world without Israel. But if we don't stand up for Israel, and we don't stand up for the Jewish state, then I worry if our grandchildren and their children are going to have a state of Israel. A year ago May, we had that 11-day conflict with Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the PIJ. The ADL reported 200 anti-Semitic incidences in the United States over those 11 days alone. 200. There were 17,000 anti-Semitic tweets on Twitter during that 11-day period. And of course, those tweets really were completely transparent. Death to the Jews. Hitler was right. Free Palestine. It feels like that extremism itself, whether it's coming from the right or the left, is really driving this sense of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred throughout the world, certainly within our country. I can tell you that this past summer, we took a trip to see my mother. And Mom, if you're watching, to see my mother. We hadn't seen her in quite some time. And this was the first time that I had taken a driving trip in quite some time as well. And as we drove from state to state, we could feel a sense of tension that we haven't felt before. When we would go into different establishments, if there were cars parked in front of those establishments, and if they had politically driven bumper stickers or magnets on them, it aroused emotion in us. Is this a safe place for us to go? Are we going to be wanted here? I'm proud to say, or I'm maybe ashamed to say, this is the first time in my life, and although you might think I'm 21, I'm actually 51. This is the first time in 51 years I've ever questioned my safety in going to visit places in America. Maybe I'm privileged, but I'm not alone now where we're questioning our safety. These extremist ideologies that usually are on the periphery are now bleeding into mainstream ideology, political thought, and our behaviors. It's coming from both sides. Now, some are very overt. The neo-Nazis, the white nationalists. We know that if we see a swastika, that's bad, and we don't want to go there. But now, there's this other type of anti-Semitism that's out there that's not quite as transparent. It comes more from the left than the right. And I'll tell you, for me, and to all who are here, my politics are known, I'm worried. I'm very, very worried. It's this idea of Israel and Zionism and an inability to understand the difference between having the land of Israel versus the decisions of the Israeli government and the standards that we hold Israel to in comparison to the standards that we hold every other country to. It's not fair. Whether you love our current administration, past administration going all the way back in time, we're Americans. Administrations change. Decisions change. But America itself is great. The same goes for Israel. Prime ministers will change. Decisions will change. Policies will change. And if we disagree with any of those particular policies or individuals or don't like any given direction, to me, that's normal. We do that in America. I'm going to say that there's not a person here who has ever been 100% in agreement with every single decision that the American government has made. And at the same token, I want to say, hopefully, that all of us today, whether we're happy or whether we're not happy, we're proud to be Americans. And our happiness will ebb and flow and change as long as we're able to stand up for our country. There's an idea now of intersectionality. It becomes this all or nothing type of thing. And that is, if we are supportive of one group, then by default we have to be supportive of another group that shares some similar ideas. We saw a lot of this around the time where George Floyd was murdered. I hope, and I certainly anticipate, or would expect, that we're not racists. That's bad. And yes, Black Lives Matter. Not necessarily the organization Black Lives Matter. Lowercase, Black Lives Matter. And yes, the Black community in the United States continues to suffer and has suffered for a long time due to systemic racism. When George Floyd was murdered, and Black Lives Matter, the organization, took a very strong stand and rallied communities to come together and stand with them, I couldn't. Black Lives Matter to me. I adore my daughter. Yet that decision not to stand with the organization caused some of my colleagues to call me a racist. I think I'm the antithesis of a racist. But they called me a racist. And they said, and this is even in print, that was printed in the JTA or the Forward or different international newspapers. We, the Jewish people, have to put aside our concerns about Israel and the positions that Black Lives Matter takes of being solely for the Palestinians, with the idea of freeing Palestine, and that Zionism is racism, because we as the Jewish people can fight about that for the rest of our lives, and now we have to put it on hold. That's what many of my colleagues said. We saw in the newspaper, this was all in the New York Times, the list of Jewish organizations who essentially signed up to say, we're willing to put Israel on hold. I can't stand, literally stand, okay, with any organization where I can be holding up a sign that says Black Lives Matter, Hispanic Lives Matter, whatever it might be, and have the person standing right next to me holding up a sign that says Zionism is racism. I can't do that. I can't do that. But does that make me a racist? Well, I certainly was accused, and accused by my colleagues. Same thing can be said for the LGBTQ community. Just in 2017, not too terribly long ago, we had the Dyke March here in Chicago, where many of us are familiar with the Jewish pride flags with the Magen David in the middle and the rainbow colors. There were Jewish activists who were there, who wanted to carry the Jewish pride flag because they felt pride, not just in being part of the LGBTQ community, but also because they're Jews. And do you know what the organizers of that parade said? Can't carry those flags. Why? They're too similar to the Israeli flag. And the Israeli flag might upset people here. And we want to make sure that we don't upset those who are here by identifying ourselves with the Jewish people. That's bad. That's a problem. That's a problem. And we have to do our research to understand that sometimes things aren't exactly as they seem. And we have to stand up for the Jewish causes. The organizers of the Dyke March posted this on Facebook. Undying solidarity with Palestine and our Palestinian comrades. Israel is the oppressor against the Palestinians. Israel is an apartheid state. And if we don't stand, then what do we get accused of? We're intolerant. We're homophobic. Yeah, my colleague said that to me. If you know me even remotely, I don't think in any way we exude this intolerant behavior. I exude this intolerant behavior, but they were adamant. You don't stand for that? You know? You've got a problem. The reality is that they have a problem. They have a problem because we can stand for social justice causes. That's good. But we can't stand for social justice causes at the expense of our Jewish tradition. If you think about this, we stand with all different people trying to fight oppression. Do we stand up for ourselves? I'm on Facebook a lot. What gets the most number of likes on my Facebook page? Evelyn. What gets the least number of likes? Anything I post about Jewish history or anti-Semitism or Holocaust denial. Those get the least. Most of my friends are Jewish. The interesting thing is that the ones who like those historical pieces are the non-Jews. They're the ones who like that, but not us, not the Jewish community. I'm so worried about that. All the more so. We know the dangers that our kids are facing on college campuses. Now, I want to say with the examples that I've given regarding Black Lives Matter and regarding the Dyke March, of course, apologies were issued. Retractions were made. We're charged here today on Yom Kippur to forgive. We're challenged to forget. And there's a danger to forgetting. We think about that just with the Holocaust itself. The fact that now some schools require permission slips to study the Holocaust because it's too upsetting. It happened. It was real. There are people who say it didn't happen. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinians right now, even though we know Hamas is really the head of the Palestinians right now. He did a whole dissertation on Holocaust denial. It didn't happen. You know, we have to be very, very careful because if we forget and if we don't teach and if we don't remind each other that standing up as a Jew is important and being proud that we are Jewish is important, what kind of future do we have? BDS on college campuses. BDS, some say that it's supportive of Israel. What? But some say that BDS is supportive of Israel. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. That's what BDS stands for. It's focused on demonizing Israel, delegitimatizing Israel, and denying Israel the right of self-identification. In the process of having a two-state solution in Israel, okay, which, please God, will happen in our time. I don't know how hopeful I am of that. But one of the purposes of the two-state solution is this idea that just as the Jews have the right to self-identify as the Jewish people, the Palestinians have the right to self-identify as the Palestinian people in their own land. I support that. I hope many of us support that, if not all of us support that idea. Everyone should be able to live together in peace, but through BDS, it doesn't promote peace. It destabilizes Israel and the Palestinians. It's a terrible thing. No one benefits from that. There's economic isolation, not only for Israel, but Palestinians have Israeli work permits. Many of them work in Israel. And if we're boycotting Israel, or divesting from Israel, or sanctioning Israel, we're not helping the Palestinians. We're not helping them bring home the needed income that they have to support their families. We're not helping them to stabilize a government that would be outside of the realm of Hamas. It's a terrible thing. And we have to be able to respond. But this is what's plaguing college campuses today. The idea of Students for the Justice of Palestine. They host things like die-ins, meaning you pretend that you come and you're covered with fake blood and you spend the time together as if the Israelis killed you. That doesn't help. That doesn't help. And that in itself, too, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. How can we think that it's terribly different? Much more similar than being different. What really scares me is how our kids are responding. A student recently said to me, "You know, a swastika appeared at school." I said, "That's horrible." He said, "I bet a Jew did it." He might not be wrong. The pressures that our kids are facing today and the concern of standing up for Judaism is so great that they conform. We hear Jewish jokes all the time. We're Jews. But if someone who's not among us says a Jewish joke, it hurts. And we might laugh a little bit. Sarah used laughing as a coping mechanism. We learned about that on Rosh Hashanah. We might cry a little bit. We know that Hannah cried. That was part of her coping mechanism. But what we need to do is we need to say, that's not funny. Don't share that. That's not funny. The stereotypes, the tropes, the idea that Jews control the world, not funny. We got to stand up for ourselves. So the question becomes, are we afraid? Yeah. I think we are. There are times now in the world where I take my kippah off. Because I'm afraid. I don't like being afraid. I don't like having to hide who I am because I'm seeing symbols of hatred. I'm hearing Jews condemning Jews for loving Israel. I don't want to be afraid, and I hope that you don't either. Ultimately, when it comes to teaching the responsibility to stand up for the Jewish people and our values and our traditions, which are v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love each other. These shared values are values that our society needs to be reminded of. We need to restore that sense of ethical behavior and moral behavior. We, the Jewish people, that's the center of who we are. And if we don't lead by example, how can we expect our children and grandchildren to lead? Are the Jews to blame because all of this anti-Semitism? Because of all of this hatred? I like to think not. But if we don't stand up for ourselves the way we stand up with others, we're going to be to blame. And we can't let that happen. In the new year 5783, may we deepen our commitment to all people needing our help and our support. All people. May we lessen the fear of standing against anti-Semitism and Jew hatred and increase our pride of being Jewish and support the state of Israel. May we be written and sealed in the book of life and experience health and healing and happiness and peace in the year ahead. Gamar Chatima Tova. Good Yantif.